from Allah, they will all be saved. Every single one of them. Whoever's got a cross on his soldier will be a cross on his chest will be saved. All these Christians will be saved. Even the whores of Paris and Chicago, even the gamblers of Las Vegas, and the queers of San Francisco, and the drug addicts of Miami. They all will be raised above the clouds when the nuclear bombs come upon the Muslims. And the only ones who will be destroyed will be the Muslims. The people of Tawheed, the people of worship of Allah. Even if you're at the Kaaba, clinging on to the Kaaba, you will be destroyed when this occurs. And this is the belief of many American presidents. 7 American presidents have held this belief of Armageddon. For instance, we find that Jimmy Carter, in 1979, on March 13th, when he traveled to Israel after the signing of the Camp David Accords, he gave a speech at the Israeli Knesset where he said, 7 American presidents have believed and demonstrated that America's relationship with Israel is more than just a special relationship. It has been and it is a unique relationship. And it is a relationship which is indestructible because it is rooted in the consciousness and the morals and the religions and the beliefs of the American people themselves. Israel and the United States were shaped by immigrant pioneers, and we share the heritage of the Bible, meaning the Old Testament in this case. And so these American presidents believe that the battle now in the Middle East is a battle between Goliath and David. And David is the state of Israel, and Goliath are the Arabs. So we are the pagan Philistines, and they are the recipients of the prophets. And that's why we find that President Reagan, 2 presidents ago, on more than 11 occasions stated that he believed that the world was going to come to an end, and that he believed in the coming of the Battle of Armageddon. In fact, it was reported in the New York Times that during a conversation with the director of AIPAC, the Israeli lobby, Reagan said to the director of the Israeli lobby in America, "You know, I turn back to your ancient prophets in the Old Testament and the signs foretelling Armageddon. And I find myself wondering if we're that generation that's going to see that come about. I don't know if you noticed I don't know if you have noticed any of the prophecies lately, but believe me, they certainly describe the times we are going through." Mike Evans, one of the Christian fundamentalist leaders, who was originally a Jew who adopted Christianity, relates that in 1985, Reagan invited him and Jim Baker, who was another Christian fundamentalist who fell into dishonor because he had sexual relations with a woman, something I guess uncommon for Christians, huh? And Jimmy Swaggart, another one of them, and Jerry Falwell. And Mike Evans says, myself and a few others met with him in private. And I will never forget what he told us. The president, meaning Reagan, expressed the belief that America was on the verge of a spiritual awakening. And I believe it with all my heart. God is raising up people like you and me in intercessory prayer and love to prepare the world for the return of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Meaning by this, Messiah, because they believe that Jesus is Allah. Ta'ala an dhalika uluwan kabira. And likewise, George Bush also had very close ties with the fundamentalists. And likewise, the current American president, Clinton, his work and his closeness to the Jews, it's so obvious. How many times have we seen him wearing the Jewish yarmulke on his head and reading Jewish prayers and praying upon their graves as if he was a Jewish rabbi himself. And so therefore, the American presidents, and American, as we have seen from the statement of Carter, 7 American presidents, he said from Carter's time, and since that time we've had 3 presidents, Reagan and Bush and also Clinton. So it's 10 presidents have held this belief in these Christian ideals. But what do they hold concerning Islamic fundamentals? And what do they regard us sitting in this room? Do they look at us with such loving eyes? Do they look at their own fundamentalists or not? Well, we can determine their position from the statements of President Nixon, who, as you know, died a couple of years ago. He wrote a book called 1999, Victory Without War. And this is a title that reeks with these beliefs. Because, he said 1999, just a year before the millennium. Victory without war. In other words, the age of peace is going to be ushered in. And he talks about the ascendancy of a single world government and what America must do. And he says, Nixon says, and in the Middle East, we see the traditional rivalry of Arab versus Jew evolving into a conflict between Islamic fundamentalists on the one hand and Israel and the moderate Arab states on the other. Now he wrote this book in the early 1990s, before the Gulf War. What did he say? The Middle East tradition, was first Arab against Jews, is now going to become what? Arabs and Jews against Muslim fundamentalists. This is why I said that the summit of the peacemakers is just an indication of this declaration of war against us. And he also says, in the Muslim world, from Morocco to Indonesia, Islamic fundamentalism has replaced communism as the principal instrument of violent change. And he also says, telling America to return back to its Christian roots, giving words that only the most arrogant and haughty fundamentalists would say. He says that when America was weak and poor 200 years ago, we were sustained by our faith. In other words, when America was formed in 1776, America was sustained by their faith when they were weak and poor. And then he says, as we enter into our 3rd century and the next millennium, we must rediscover and reinvigorate our faith. And likewise, Nixon also said, at the conclusion of the first famous Reagan-Gorbachev summit, which I talked about in Malta, Foreign Affairs magazine quoted Nixon as saying that the United States and Russia must unite together to fight Islamic fundamentalism, which has, occurred as we saw in Bosnia and now in Chechnya. Okay, so therefore this idea of returning the Jews back to Palestine first began with the Christians. The idea of Zionism first began with the Christians. Should we stop now this time to give a break to the brothers? Or? Okay, 10 minutes they're giving me. So don't. I won't be long, inshallah. So this idea first started with the Christians. And that, unlike what most of us think who studied history, modern history, think that the first call to Zionism began with Theodor Herzl in Switzerland in the 1800s, but it really began 4 centuries before that amongst the Christians. And if we do not understand this, we will not be able to understand why the West supports the Jews in this conflict. How were the Jews formerly treated in Europe? For those of you who have studied history know that the Jews are cursed in the New Testament. The Jews are cursed. Indeed, we know from the Qur'an that Allah cursed the Jews from before the time of Jesus alayhi salam. Because Allah tells us in the Qur'an, in Surah 5, verse 78, Surah Al-Ma'idah, that cursed were the unbelievers of the children of Israel by the tongue of David and Jesus, son of Mary. That for the rebelling and their transgression. The Jews are accursed, that the Christians realizing this, that they are murderers and bloodsuckers, was not the reason for Christian enmity. But the Christian enmity towards the Jews is because the Christians believe that the Jewish crime is that they killed the Lord Jesus. Ta'ala Allah an dhalika 'uluwan kabira. The Christians believe that the Jews killed God. And so therefore an enmity occurred between them from those days. But as Allah spoke truthfully when He told us in Surah An-Nisa, that they neither slayed Him nor crucified Him, meaning Jesus. And as a result of this, the Roman Catholic Church, who is located in Rome as you know, has continued to curse and show enmity to the Jews in an amazing way. One of the oddities of this enmity and this animosity was that in the Middle Ages, when a dangerous plague spread in Europe, which was known as the Black Death, and killed millions of people, laid whole cities to waste, the Pope declared, or it's not the Pope, but at least certain Christians declared that the cause of this disease was the Jews. So they used to put the Jews to the sword. It is as if any and all filth and evil in the world is to be laid at the doorstep of the Jews. And as a result, the Jews faced much persecution in Europe and faced violent cleansing. Ethnic cleansing began with the Jews in Europe. It occurred in the 13th and 14th and 15th centuries in Britain, in Germany, in France, and other European countries and cities. Jews were cast out, were killed, were expelled in order to cleanse the societies from the evil of the Jews. And that's because the Europeans, the Christians, saw them as the most dangerous and most evil of Allah's creatures. And it was from this hell of Europe that the Jews fled to where? To the sanctuary of Al-Andalus, of Islamic Spain, where they were sheltered by the Muslims. And when the Christians overtook Al-Andalus and removed the last Muslim stronghold or foothold in Andalus, which was in Granada, in 1492, the Christians then began to expel the Muslims and the Jews from Al-Andalus. And what became as the Inquisition occurred. And so the Jews were forced to flee with the Muslims, and the Jews fled to the Muslim lands, especially the Turkish areas under Turkish control, like Greece and the Balkans and so forth, and Cyprus and these lands. And it was during this historical period, when the Muslims were taken out of Al-Andalus, that Allah decreed that two significant events occur. Two significant events which we live its aftermath until today, even though it's 500 years has passed. The first event was the discovery of America by the Europeans, a historical geographical event. And the second event was the emergence of the Protestant movement in Christianity and the split of the church. And with that, let me stop to give the brothers a chance to take a break, because I think they're tired, huh? Give them 10 minutes or something like that, huh? A break. And we'll pick up from there and continue in about 10 minutes. Jazakumullah khair.
Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. Alright, we're continuing our discussion now of the historical events that have led to the current Middle East situation. And we mentioned that it was in the year 1492, or in that period of the 15th and 16th centuries, that two major events occurred that Allah decreed. One of which, geographical, the other religious. And it is the confluence of these two events that has resulted in the creation, or the resulting from that, the greatest power inimical to Islam in the world today, the United States of America. These two events were the European discovery of America, a historical geographical event, and the second issue was the start of the Protestant movement. You brothers probably know that Protestantism, or is that Christian sect who objected to and revolted against the authority of the Pope of Rome, the Catholic Church. In general, in summary, they believe that no human being can stand intermediary between them and Jesus. And they argued that biblical interpretation, biblical reading, should be for every single individual to do. In other words, before that, the priests were the only ones who had had copies of the Bible, and they would read and interpret it to the laity or to the common folk. However, they believed that every Christian should himself be able to read his Bible and interpret it and so forth. And they also believed in a literalism of the Bible. That unlike the Catholics, they believe whatever is mentioned in the Bible should be taken literally and not be given figurative or allegorical interpretation. Now, in these ideas, they were influenced by the Muslims. So much so that Martin Luther was accused himself of being a closet Muslim. And that is because the Christians, when they came to the Muslim lands during the Crusades that occurred before this by 2 centuries or 3 centuries, they came into contact with Muslim civilization and Muslims. And they saw that the Muslims had no priestly hierarchy or class. That Muslims had no intermediaries between them and Allah. That Muslims, every Muslim would read the Qur'an himself. And that Muslims believed in what the Qur'an said literally, without figuratively interpreting it. And so therefore these ideas were embedded in the psyche of the European when he returned back after the Crusades. And therefore a religious movement, a revolt occurred in Europe, led by Martin Luther. One of Martin Luther's things that occurred with him is that they translated for the first time the Bible out of Latin into what is known as the vernacular, or the languages spoke by the European peoples. And what was translated was the Old Testament into German and into English. And as a result, Protestantism was spread predominantly in Northern Europe, in Germany and in the United Kingdom, which we call now the UK or England in those days. And what had occurred was that people started to have, it became a religious movement, okay, that was rooted in the Old Testament, which they would now be reading in their vernacular, in their common tongue. Instead of reading it in Latin, they would now read it in English or in German or in whatever. And as a result, when they read this, they saw these prophecies saying that the children of Israel were going to be blessed in the seed of Abraham. And they also felt that because the Messiah had to return among the children of Israel, they thought that in order to bring back the Messiah, they had to bring the Jew into the Holy Land. And so therefore, Christian-Jewish relations changed for the first time in history. Rather than Christians putting the Jews to the sword as they did in the Catholics, the Christians started to support the Jews. And as a result, it is considered that, for instance, Napoleon, when he attacked the Islamic world and conquered Egypt in 1798, one of his main aims, besides conquering Egypt and so forth in order to, but one of his main aims was to take Palestine in order to give it to the Jews. And likewise, one of his aims was, of course, most of you might not know, that he attempted to go to Medina to take the Prophet's body out of his grave and put it in the Louvre Museum in Paris. So, Napoleon was, one of his aims was to let the Jews come into Palestine. And so therefore, Christian-Jewish relations started to improve slowly and slowly. And the Jews, seeing this, decided to take advantage of this. And so they started to support Protestantism. Because the Jews, when they were under Catholic rule, were forced to live in ghettos, they were put to the sword, they were persecuted. But now the Christians are coming, a Christian sect says that, look, we need to be kind to the Jews, and we need to take care of them and move them to Palestine so the Messiah can come back. And also the enmity that occurred between the Christians fighting themselves, the Jews found in this a respite. Because now the Christian was putting sword against Christian, instead of putting the sword against the Jew. And so therefore the Jews started to support the Protestant movement with all their money and their machinations, their plotting. And many Jews entered into this movement and helped it spread. And slowly these ideas spread from Protestantism until it reached the other Christian sects. And as a result, Europe in the centuries following the fall of Muslim Spain, in the 16th and 17th centuries, witnessed a sectarian strife of killing between Protestant and Catholic, which the vestiges of this war is still witnessed in the end of Europe, in the border, the final outer extreme of Europe, where in Ireland. You see? I mean, this battle of Catholic against Protestant in the heart of Europe came to an end, right? But the vestiges of this battle is still at the periphery of Europe, in Northern Ireland. So as a result, the Protestants, being slaughtered by the Catholics, were forced to flee. And where did they decide to flee to? The New World. And they came to the New World with a religious belief rooted in the Old Testament. And that's why the first Americans, Europeans to come to the United States were known as who? The Pilgrims. What was the other name for them? They're called because of the P also. Huh? Protestants, they're Protestants, I know. Puritans. Right? The Puritans, the strong Christians, And if you see any of those movies or documentaries or something like this, they came in there, Massachusetts, right? The most liberal state now in the United States, 400 years ago was the most severely religious state in the United States. The most severely religious area where they applied the law of Moses and so forth. So, this new religious thing, and they thought that the Christians, the Protestants, when they came from England and from Germany into North America, they thought that their coming to North America was like the children of Israel, leaving the persecution of Moses and going to the Holy Land. So when they came to America, to this wilderness, they started to name the cities of America that they lived and they formed according to names of biblical cities. And that's why, for instance, myself and Brother Idris, we live maybe about 20 or 30 miles from Damascus. Not Damascus, Syria, but Damascus, Maryland. And so forth. Throughout the United States, you find cities and places mentioned which are taken from biblical names, because this is what they did when they were forming these cities. And they thought of themselves like the children of Israel. In fact, it was even considered when they formed the United States of America, when they were debating, when they revolted against the British Crown, and they thought, what should we call this country? And before they decided to settle the United States of America, an idea was put forth to call it New Israel. See, it's a reflection of this biblical belief. And thus, America was established, as Carter said in the speech that I quoted, or that excerpt of the speech, upon this Protestant biblical foundation, Old Testament foundation. And now you can understand why, if you understand this, how America is rooted in the Old Testament. How come America, with all its might and its wealth, stands in to support the Jews now in Israel, and stands prepared to receive the Antichrist, or the Messiah who they expect will appear in the year 2000. And as a result of this, throughout American history, you find people calling to Jews gathering in Israel and Palestine. Among these was a person named William Eugene Blackstone, who was born in the year 1841. I mean, almost 107 years before the foundation of the State of Israel. And he wasn't a Jew, but he was a Methodist Christian, and he wrote a book called Jesus is Coming. Jesus is Coming. This book was translated into 48 languages, including Hebrew, and sold over 1 million copies. In fact, in the last century, it was the most widely read book in the West, after, like, the Bible. And in this book, his idea, if we were to summarize, is about 100 pages, that we must gather all the children of Israel to, all the Jews, to the children to Palestine to prepare for the Messiah, because he was born in 1841, and he thought the year 1900 Jesus was going to come, so we have to prepare for this. And likewise, what he did was he got a petition together, where it was signed by 413 prominent Americans, congressmen, judges, lawyers, and so forth, and they were presented to Benjamin Harrison, who was the president at that time, petitioning him to use his good offices and influence, what they said, to achieve Jewish claims to Palestine. And this was given to Benjamin Harrison in the year 1891. Okay. At this time in England, the other Protestant, bastion, we found that during Victorian rule, Queen Victoria's rule, the British established something called the Palestine Exploration Fund. And this Palestine Exploration Fund, or the PEF in short, the patron of it was the Archbishop of Canterbury, who, as you all know, is the leading bishop of Protestant British tradition. And the purpose of this fund was to discover the Promised Land and its boundaries and landmarks in the Torah. And then we find at the turn of the century, we come to the next individual, prominent individual, is Balfour, who his niece in his bibliography, or in his biography, mentioned that he had a faith deeply rooted in the Torah, and that he would read the Bible on a daily basis and believed in it literally. And it was a result of this faith of his that he composed the Balfour Declaration, allowing the Jews, or giving them a right to live establish a homeland in Palestine. And at the same time, during Balfour's time, you had the Prime Minister of England at the turn of the century was Lloyd George, who calls himself a self-confessed Zionist. Here he's calling himself a Zionist. And he proclaimed his belief that it was necessary for the Jews to gather into Palestine in order for the Messiah to come back. And that's why at the beginning of the century, the British were the ones who were assisting the Jews to gather into Palestine. It was the British who took Palestine, and it was the British who declared the Balfour Declaration, and it was the British who set up the Jews in Palestine. And there are other evidences, which are too many to quote at this time. A book which was written by a lady called Regina Sharif, and was printed here in the United Kingdom in London. It's called Non-Jewish Zionism. She covers 4 centuries, showing through the poetry and the writings, the intellectual writings of Christian Europe, supporting the idea, and Regina Sharif is not a Muslim, her name is, she's a Christian, I think a Palestinian Christian, supporting that how the Christians believed it was necessary for the Jews to be in Palestine in order for the Messiah to come, and they were working on this from the 14th and 15th and 16th century until they finally were able to achieve it in this century. Indeed, Chaim Weizmann, the first Jewish Prime Minister, said that from the main reasons the Jews were able to win the Balfour Declaration from England to establish a national Jewish homeland was the influence of the Torah on British sentiment, on the common Britisher. And at this time we find also in America, when the British were doing this, the American president was Woodrow Wilson, who we talked about earlier, we mentioned him earlier. When Wilson had the opportunity, came to the League of Nations to establish a homeland for the Jews in Israel, he said, and I quote, "To think that I, the son of the manse," meaning the manse is the church, the son of the church, should be able to restore the Holy Land to its people. He thought this was a divine mission for him, that he was able to restore the Holy Land to its people, meaning the Jews. And he was a Presbyterian, and the word manse is a Presbyterian term used for the church. And about Wilson, Regina Sharif mentions that it was his commitment to Zionism was very deep, and this was due to his Christian Zionist ideology, to the degree that he was so blinded by his Christian fanatical beliefs to the moral, political, and religious consequences of allowing the Jews to be in Palestine. In fact, among the ludicrous oddities is that President Wilson, when asked one time at the White House how many Jews he thought were in the world, he said 100 million Jews. And he said it's a shame that there's 100 million people who wouldn't have their own country. Even though the Jews at that time their numbers didn't surpass 10 million. But you see how the Jews were able to indoctrinate them. Because the message in the Bible says that their numbers will be as the dust of the earth. So here you have the president of the most educated nation of the world thinking there are 100 million Jews in the world who don't have a country when their numbers weren't even more than 10 million. Also during this time, right after World War I, you had the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the United States Congress, an individual by the name of Henry Cabot Lodge, who in 1922, during a speech in Boston, he made the following remarks. In 1922, he says, "It seems to me that it's entirely becoming, it means it's very good, and commendable, that the Jewish people in all portions of the world should desire to have a national home for such members of their race, as wish to return to the country which was the cradle of their race, and where they lived and labored for several thousand years." In other words, he's saying it's very good to see that the Jews have their national home, which they were for 1,000 years before. Then he says this, and this is the important point. "I never should accept in patience the thought that Jerusalem and Palestine should be under the control of the Mohammedans," meaning the Muslims. 16 years before the creation of Israel, Henry Cabot Lodge, the head of the Foreign Relations Committee of the United States Congress, said, "I cannot accept the idea that Jerusalem and Palestine is going to remain in the control of the Muslims." Because, after World War I, right, when he's speaking after World War I, 6 years or 4 years after World War I, Palestine was taken from the control of the Ottoman Muslims, right, and put under British control, mandate. So he's saying, but I cannot see it ever. I cannot have myself stand bare to see it, that Palestine returns back to the Muslims and Jerusalem in particular. This is to show us that the Christians believed before the Jews that the Jews should be in Palestine. In fact, when Theodor Herzl first came up with the idea that the Jews should go to Palestine, most of the Jews in the world rejected the idea. Because many Jews believe, and you will find many Orthodox Jewish rabbis in America and elsewhere, believe that this is an indication of their end. That they know that from their scriptures, that once the Jews all gather in Palestine, the Messiah will come and they'll be slaughtered, and they will come to their end. So for this reason, some Orthodox Jews do not want to see the state of Israel, and they are against it. Because they see this as an indication that their end has come close. And one of the results of this Protestant religion was just like they had a revival when it first started 500 years ago, and they went to America and so forth, that now it's experiencing a Christian revival. It is a revival, and it's a fundamentalism. And it's a fundamentalism which is rooted in the Bible. We know that, for instance, it is said, according to statistics like the Gallup poll, the Gallup Institute says that America, after Ireland, is the most religiously Christian nation. Indeed, 94% of all Americans are said to believe in God, according to their doctrines, and 71% of all Americans believe in life after death. In 1970, 131 million Americans were church members. In 1980, it was 135. But however, by 1982, it became 139.6 million. So you can see in 2 years, while from 70 to 80, church increased 4 million people. And of course, the American population increased, so that's not a natural increase. But however, the 2 years that followed, it jumped 4 million. And for instance, we know that in 1982, Americans donated $60 billion to the church. Most Muslim countries don't have $60 billion as their gross national product. Saudi Arabia is probably one of the richest Muslim countries, if not the richest Muslim country. Their gross national product is not more than $45 or $50 billion. That's a whole nation. But yet Christians in America donated to their churches $60 billion in 1982. What is that money compared to the national wealth of the poorer Muslim countries like Chad, Niger, Bangladesh, and so forth? One might imagine. In fact, and as a result, we find the Christian missionaries that in 1989, total Christian contribution from missionary activity alone was $151 billion. And this is reported by the International Bulletin of Missionary Research. And at the end of my trip here in the United Kingdom, there's going to be a lecture, myself and Brother Idris, regarding Christian activities to make the Muslims, evangelization of the Islamic world, I think is what he titled it. How many schools do you find, Christian schools in the United States? In 1981 and 1982, it is reported that there were 1,948 higher studies institutions for Christian studies. In 1954, there were only 123 Christian schools, day schools, in the United States. By 1980, it was more than 18,000. Think of that. In 1954, 123 Christian day schools. By 1980, it occurred how much? More than 18,000 in the United States. This is all indications of a religious revival in America. A Christian fundamentalism. Also, for instance, we know that the famous universities in the United States were all founded upon Christian fundamentalists or Christian Protestant bases like Harvard, Yale, and other universities. Today, Christian fundamentalists have more than 20,000 schools where millions of students study. However, the Islamic University of Medina, probably one of the few Islamic institutions we have in the Islamic world, has no more than 1,000 or 2,000 students in the student body. In all of Saudi Arabia, there's only maybe 3 or 4 Islamic universities. I would imagine that in the whole Islamic world, in fact, I think I read one time that the whole Islamic world, the total amount of Islamic universities we have in the Islamic world is no more than 100 universities. And yet, in the United States, they have more than 20,000 schools of different levels, where millions of students study. Also, we know that the presidents of the United States, one of the indications of their religious revival is that the presidents of the United States, we find them have a very deep religious belief. Jimmy Carter, until today, is a traveling missionary. Today you find him in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Tomorrow you find him in Sudan and Ethiopia and Somalia. The next day he's in Bosnia, going all over the world, spreading Christian ideas and spreading the political agenda of the United States of America. Likewise, Ronald Reagan, as we said, who came after Carter, mentioned that on more than 11 occasions he believed in the biblical prophecies in Armageddon. Publicly, 11 occasions he declared that. Bush was an ally of the fundamentalists, even though he himself might have not held those ideas, but did it out of hypocrisy. And likewise, we know that Clinton is this very strong, Christian and has his Christian facade to him. In 1984, the amounts of religious books that were sold in the United States were more than 1/3 of the total gross sales of the entire commercial book market. In other words, more than 1/3 of all the books sold in the United States were religious books in 1984. And it is estimated the value of these books were equal to $1 billion, which were bought by 37 million buyers. I don't think now you can find 37 million buyers for Islamic books to that degree. Also, we know, for instance, in the United States, what they call the electric church, or the evangelical preachers of the like of in the past, like Jimmy Swaggart and Jim Baker, and today, like you find Jerry Falwell and others. It is said that 47% of all Americans tune in at least once a week to watch fundamentalist programs in 1980. One new religious radio station is being established every week in America, and one new religious television station every month. And this statistic was taken in 1978. What must it be now in close to 1998, 20 years later? And in fact, we know that, for instance, one of the organizations which are doing the missionary work in the Islamic world reach now more than 60 countries of the world through satellite broadcasts, where millions and millions of people, hundreds of millions of people watch their programs. The Association of National Religious Broadcasters, when they were founded in 1944 in the United States, they only had 49 stations. But by 1980, it was 800 stations, which produced 1,000 different religious programming. They had 1,000 religious stations they had. It is said that the two major Christian fundamentalist stars, Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, take in every year more money than the Republican and Democratic parties combined. The two major political parties. So you might imagine two church leaders, two fundamentalist leaders in the United States, bring in more money into their churches than the two major political parties in the United States, the Democrats and Republicans. Which is similar to, I guess, Labour and what? Likud? What's in English? Labour and Conservative or Tory or whatever. And so therefore, this American fundamentalist is considered one of the major political phenomena of the 20th century. And it is said now that the followers of American fundamentalism in the United States reach between 40 to 80 million people. And for those of us in the United States, like myself and Brother Idris, we saw that in the last congressional elections in 1995, how the Christians, or 1994, how the Christians fundamentalist coalition were able to sweep Congress and put a conservative leadership in Congress for the first time in 40 years. And how they're opposed now they have a great influence now in the agenda for the next coming presidential elections. In fact, one sociologist studying from the United Kingdom, studying the phenomena of American fundamentalists, says that given their following and their money and their growth, that this trend of thought should last for at least 500 more years. Because the power, I mean, we saw the communists, right? Communists, how long did they last? They lasted about, 100 years, and it just came to an end. But this British sociologist saying, given the way American fundamentalism is growing, and the power they have, and the wealth, that as an idea, as a religion, as a sect, it should last for at least 500 more years. You might imagine what type of power we're talking about. Okay, let us see. So, and one of the reasons for the spread of American fundamentalism is the appearance of AIDS. You know, America was a very sexually loose society after the 60s and in the 70s. And Americans occurred what was known as the sexual revolution. And it was passé to jump into bed with one partner and then the other, and then jump the next moment with another partner, or whatever sort of sexual perversion they engaged into. However, though, with the appearance of AIDS, this was one of the major causes, this disease that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plague Allah struck them with, one of the major causes for the return to the people. Because what had happened was the people saw this as a sign. And people started to then question their moral decay. And as Nixon said, it's important that they have to reinvigorate and rediscover their faith. And so one of the major reasons for the return of American fundamentalism in the last 15 to 20 years is the decay of American society and the loss of the mores of the society through the sexual revolution and elsewhere, and other things. What is interesting to know is that concerning the American fundamentalist movement is that the Organization of Islamic Broadcasting in Jeddah, this is an organization, did a study concerning evangelical broadcasting in the Islamic world. And they found in their study that there are 38 television stations, 66 cable networks, 1,400 radio stations. Among these are 4 television services with the annual budget of each one of them exceeding $50 million just to make da'wah, Christian da'wah to the Muslims. It is estimated that in 1985, half of all Christians use satellites, Christian broadcasting. This means that they are able to reach all corners of the earth. In fact, regarding cinema, the Christians have prepared $100 million to prepare movies which they called under the title the Genesis Project. And the idea was to produce 15 films taken from Genesis and 18 films taken from the Gospel of Luke. And in these programs, one of the things which they produced was called, it's called the Jesus movie. What was it called? Jesus? No, that's called, it's called the Jesus movie or something like that. And this movie has been shown in about 20 Islamic countries. And they've translated into over 50 languages. It's just about the life, the seerah of Jesus, alayhi salam, but from a Christian perspective. And they have distributed over 100 million video tapes of this in the Islamic world. They broadcasted publicly in Egypt, in Pakistan, in Iraq, on government television and elsewhere in the Islamic world. In the new Central Asian countries of Kazakhstan and so forth, one of their first aims is to put this movie, the Jesus movie, on public television in order to influence the minds of the Muslims. What do these programs state? We can take an example from something said by Jimmy Swaggart, where he said in one of his programs, I feel that America is tied with the spiritual umbilical cord to Israel. These ties go back long before the founding of the United States of America. The Judeo-Christian concept goes all the way back to Abraham and God's promise to Abraham, which I believe also included America. Because God still says, I will bless those that bless Israel, and I will curse those that curse Israel. Of course, the Bible says, I will bless those that bless Abraham. But he's saying to the people, I will bless those that bless Israel. You see how they interpret it for their own beliefs. And thank God, the United States of America still stands supreme today. And I firmly believe that this is because we stood behind Israel, and I pray God we always will stand behind Israel. The meaning of his words is that America's blessings and America's strength comes because it stands behind Israel. So once America leaves Israel, it means America will collapse. This is what they believe. And this is why you find that the Christian stars of Christian fundamentalism are very supportive of Israel. For instance, Jerry Falwell, the head of an organization which was called the Moral Majority, which he disbanded a few years ago, he has said that America is a Judeo-Christian republic. And he has said that to stand against Israel is to stand against God. And he's talked always in his programs about God's promise to Abraham 4,000 years ago, that I will bless them that bless thee and curse him that curses thee. And he says from a theological perspective, America should be without hesitation giving total financial and military support to the state of Israel. He also thought that when Israel was established in 1948, this was the key to the prophecies of the Torah, and a sign of God's faithfulness and blessing to his chosen people. He also has a university called Liberty University, where he says by the year 2000 he will have 50,000 students studying from numbers of countries around the world the divinities from a Jewish perspective. And he has said that Genesis indicates the boundaries of Israel will stretch from the river Euphrates on the east to west of the Nile River. The promised land would encompass portions of present-day Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Sudan, all of Lebanon, Jordan, and Kuwait. This is what he says. This is all belongs to the Jews, all these lands. Likewise, he attacks the Arabs, and he says that the Arabs are an accursed race because they are from the people of Canaan, and he says there's no room for the Arab in America. And also we find Pat Robertson, who has tried to become, on occasion, once or twice, has tried to reach for the Republican nomination as President of the United States. He has his Christian Broadcast Network, which broadcasts 24 hours during the day, and among his programs is the 700 Club. And he has also said the rebirth of Israel is the only indication that the final countdown for the world has begun. And he calls the Arabs God's enemies. And he says God will establish, he said there's no room for justice with the Palestinians so long as it's God's will to establish Israel and demarcate its borders. One of the things he's done is that he has opened up a station which is known as the Middle East Broadcasting Station. Now, previously used to be called Star of Hope. And when it first opened up, he said this statement. He said, because it broadcasts to the Muslim land. It broadcasts to Syria, Iraq, Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. And in which Pat Robertson said, and in the first broadcast day, the Qur'an and Muslim teachings do not meet the deepest needs of the human heart. These are times of crises, and Islam stands on the divided doctrine, meaning that Islam, he expects, will fall and collapse. Robertson goes on to say, while there are deeply ingrained prejudices, there is a new openness to the gospel message, if only if it could be available by television. And to show his power, that in 1985, he assisted, it was when the Americans took the Jews out of Ethiopia, the Flaccid Jews, they did it on Pat Robertson's airplane. And Pat Robertson, with the CIA, assisted the Jews, this was widely reported in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and elsewhere, to assist them. The Americans did it, and Bush took Robertson along. He was at that time a vice president, and they went along to do it. Likewise, we have a person named George Otis, which we will talk about in our evangelical lecture. At one time, he ran an organization called High Adventure Ministry, and now he runs an organization called the Sentinel Group. And he has said that that he believes literally that the gospel, the Bible, is the word of God, and that Israel is the precursor for the second coming of the Messiah, and that he says in one of his advertisements, we are limited to the security of Israel. We believe that all of the Holy Land is an inalienable possession of the Jewish people. And we believe that the establishment of modern Israel is an undeniable fulfillment of biblical prophecy, the herald of the coming Messiah. Likewise, we had a person in the United States from the 80s called Mike Evans. He's a Jew who became a Christian. And he ran an hour-long special called Israel, America's Key to Survival. In other words, America will not survive unless it supports Israel. And he also came about with a proclamation of support where he called the American people to come to the support of America's best friend by signing a proclamation of blessing to Israel, for Israel, because God distinctly told him to produce this television special. In other words, this television special that he had is wahi from Allah to him. This wahi that he received from Allah, that he says, was aired on 50 stations and was seen by tens of millions of Americans, Europeans, and even Latin Americans. In his proclamation, he had over 1 million people sign it, and it was then given to the American president and to the Israeli prime minister. Another group in the United States, a very dangerous group, is called the International Christian Embassy. This is probably considered the most dangerous group, one of the most dangerous groups in the world. Basically, they say that God has required them to establish an embassy for them. They had a conference where in Basel, Switzerland, which was the place that Theodore Herzl had the first Zionist conference. And in this conference, they came out with a declaration of support for the state of Israel. It's probably too lengthy, we don't have enough time to go into this, but it's a very important thing. It shows the mentality of these Christian fundamentalists towards this. It's interesting that we find that the Christian fundamentalists believe that the state of Israel is a sign of the coming of the Messiah. Interestingly, that Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, in his refutation of Christianity and Judaism 750 years ago, approximately, when he wrote it, he said that before the day of judgment, the Jews will have a state and an army. And this is because they are the soldiers and supporters of the Antichrist, the Dajjal. And they will have a state and an army which they will fight the Muslims with, and then finally Isa will come back and defeat the Jews, and the Muslims will defeat the Jews, and the hadith about the rock and stone and tree, which you are aware of. What is the true promise that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given? We can discuss that for some time, a few moments. We know that in every single prayer we say, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Guide us to the straight path, the path of those who you have blessed, not those who you have angered, nor those who are astray. Those who are angered with are the Jews. Those who are astray are the Christians, as the Prophet ﷺ identified. And so therefore, in every single prayer, in every single time you read Surah Al-Fatiha, is a refutation against the Jews and the Christians, and a refutation against the peace process, whether they like it or not. In fact, one of the stories, well-known stories that occurred during the Gulf War, was that when some scholars in Saudi Arabia started to speak out against the Christians, it was said that they shouldn't, the government said, we don't want you to attack the Christians on the pulpits, anymore, because these are our guests and they've come to defend us and so forth and so on. So one of the scholars in Qasim said to one prince, he said, okay, I guess you don't want us to read Surah Al-Fatiha then. Because Surah Al-Fatiha has a refutation of the Jews and Christians. And so therefore, by implication, we're not supposed to read it. So the prince said, okay, no, just don't interpret it to the people. So, you see, this is the point, that in every single salah, we are making a declaration against this. Now, after the summit of the peacemakers that occurred just 2 weeks ago, President Bill Clinton went to Israel, and while he was there, he went to visit the graves of those Jews who died in the bus, okay? And one of the things he said was, in his press conference when he arrived, standing next to Shimon Peres, the Israeli Prime Minister, was he said, I wish I could get into the heart of every single one of those young men and take out these ideas that they have, this fanatical, zealous ideas, or words to that effect, and this idea of the coming of the world, end of the world, and so forth. In other words, he's saying that he wants to change the belief of the youth of the Muslims, so they no longer consider the Jews to be their enemies. The changing of our beliefs and our identity. We know that, for instance, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given a promise to the Prophet Abraham. We know this from the Qur'an. And we also know that the promise was extended to the descendants of the Prophet Abraham through the Prophet Ismail alayhi salam, wherein which the Prophet ﷺ has said in the hadith reported by Ahmad al-Tirmidhi, and Tirmidhi declaring the hadith to be sahih, that Allah chose Ismail from the children of Abraham. And then He chose from Ismail's descendants the tribe of Canana. And from Canana He chose the Quraysh. And from Quraysh He chose the Banu Hashim, the children of Hashim. And He chose me from the children of Hashim, meaning the Prophet ﷺ. And likewise we know what Allah's promise is concerning the Jews. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Isra, and when your Lord proclaimed that He would send forth against the Jews until the day of resurrection those who would afflict them with evil chastisement. This is the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala towards the Jews, that He would punish them with people until the day of judgment. Surely your Lord is swift in retribution, and surely He is all forgiving, all merciful. This is from Surah Al-A'raf, as I said. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also said that abasement shall be pitched on the Jews wherever they are found, except when they are in a bond from Allah and a bond from the people. And they have incurred the anger from Allah, and poverty shall be pitched on them. The Jews are always in a state of abasement unless somebody props them up. And that's why only when the British propped them up, they were able to come to Palestine. And only when the Americans propped them up, they're able to stay there. But it is Allah's divine decree that whoever supports the Jew will get the punishment which is given to the Jew. And that's why when the British
supported the Jews and established them in the lands of the Muslims, Allah struck the British with what? Poverty and abasement. And so therefore that empire, which they said the sun would never set upon, was reduced to these islands, and their nose is bloodied by a bunch of gangs from Northern Ireland, unable to do something. And the poverty which you see now in the United Kingdom, I think all of you probably see and sense it and maybe taste it even. I mean, you can see how this city, right, of London, which was the jewel of the world maybe 100 years ago, looks like almost a state of disrepair. This is Allah's divine punishment for them supporting the Jews. And likewise, what is happening to America now, from its poverty and its problems, is part of Allah's divine punishment because the Americans supported the Jews. Because Allah in His Qur'an says that He will strike the Jews with humiliation and abasement and poverty. And so whoever supports them gets it. And when these Arab leaders support the Jews and sit in these peace conferences with them, Allah will strike them as He has struck them, and will continue to strike them with abasement and poverty. And what is happening to America is the result of that. Likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Isra that when the time came for the second promise came to pass, we sent against you our servants to discountenance you, meaning to disfigure you, and to enter the temple as the previous people entered it the first time, and to destroy you utterly what you ascended to. Your Lord may well have mercy upon you, but if you return for a third time, we shall punish you too. And this is what happened. The Jews were in the temple, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punished them when they became disobedient with the Babylonian pagan king. And when the Jews were again brought back out of captivity, when Cyrus, the Persian king, took them out of captivity and took them from Babylon and put them back into Palestine, when they disbelieved into Jesus, alayhi salam, Allah struck them with the Roman pagans. At that time the Romans were idol worshippers, they had to become Christians, and they burnt the temples. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, but if you return, we will return. Now they have returned. Are they obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Are they believing in His prophets? Do they believe in Jesus now? Do they believe in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Do they apply the laws of the Torah or the Qur'an? No. So then Allah's punishment will come to them again. However, this time the punishment will be the final punishment, because it will be, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the last hour will not be established till you fight the Jews. The Jews will flee and hide behind stones and trees, and on that day the stone and tree will speak, O Muslim, O Abdullah, O worshipper of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. And likewise the Prophet ﷺ has said in a hadith reported by Imam Ahmed, even though the scholars have differed concerning this hadith, some weakening it and some saying that the sanad is hasan, that the Prophet ﷺ said that whoever remains of you from this ummah will fight the Jews at the Jordan River. You will be on its east bank and they on their west. And even if this hadith is da'if, we know that the Prophet ﷺ told us from affirmed hadith in Sahih Muslim and elsewhere, that the Muslims, when they fight the final battle, it will be, Jesus will come to them in Damascus. And that the Jesus alayhi salam will kill a Dajjal at the gates of Lud, or Lud in Arabic, which is a city in Israel today, not so far from Jerusalem. So, even if this hadith in Imam Ahmed that you will be on the east bank of the river and the Jews on the west bank of the river is considered to be weak, as some scholars argue, while other scholars say it's hasan, the other hadith, which are affirmed, indicate that the battle will be there. So this hadith in itself is not going to a thing. And so therefore part of Allah's promise to us is that the Messiah will return amongst us. And that He will kill the king of the Jews, the Dajjal, the Antichrist, at the gates of Lud in Palestine, as I mentioned. And that He will break the cross and eradicate the swine and abolish the jizya. There will be no alternative for the Christians but to become Muslims on that day, or die by the sword and at the hands of the Messiah, Jesus the son of Mary, alayhi salam. And those Muslims with him. And you know why? This is a fitting punishment for the Christians. Because the Christians, for 1,500 years, have been putting the Muslims to the sword, or for 1,400 years, been putting the Muslims to the sword in the name of Jesus. And so now they're put to the sword by Jesus' sword Himself. And this is how Allah's divine retribution comes to them. Because always the punishment is going to come according to the type of sin. This is a divine law. Also among the promises is that the appearance of the Mahdi
alayhi salam, at the end of time, who will lead the Muslims in the battle against the Christians, and then Isa will come and pursue the battle against the Jews. So this land of the Middle East is unlike what the summit for the peacemakers and the New World Order says is going to be a land of peace. It's not. It's going to be a land of tribulation and warfare and bloodshed until the Day of Judgment. Because only when the Christians are eradicated and the Jews are eradicated from the face of the earth will the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala come, and there will be no more war on the earth. And the blessings of these ahadith I've spoken about elsewhere, and I wish I had time to mention, but because there's not much time left. However, we should know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said to us, O you who believe, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, whoever of you turns in apostasy from his religion, know that in his stead Allah will bring a people whom he loves and who love him. Humble toward the believers, stern toward the disbelievers, men who wage jihad in the path of Allah, not fearing to be censured by anyone who censures them. If we forsake jihad at this time, the ummah denies jihad and says that this is no longer because of international law or peace, we will become apostates from our religion. And Allah will bring forth a people who will fight jihad against the Jews and the Christians. And so therefore, it is only for our own salvation that we should return to this. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in the Qur'an, Surah Nur, Allah has promised such of you as believe and do righteous deeds that He will surely cause them to succeed the present rulers in earth. Likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, for we have written in the scripture, after the remembrance, that the earth shall be the inheritance of my righteous servants. This means, as Ibn al-Qayyim said, the inheritance of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his community. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that the mulk, the kingdom, the dominions of his ummah will reach wherever day and night reach. Meaning Islam will come and the Sharia will rule wherever day and night reach. There will come a day when London will be ruled by the Sharia, whether the Christians like that or not. If there is something called London in those days, if there's a city which is inhabited at that time, wherever day and night reach, the Sharia will rule. And of course day and night reaches here as does throughout the earth. Now, with this in mind, what is the duty for the ummah must do? Or before that, if we have a few minutes, what are the aims of this peace process? What are the aims of the New World Order? What are they trying to do now in the Middle East? Let's quickly go to them and mention what does the ummah have to do in order to counter this. The first thing they want to do is eliminate the Palestinian jihad. They want to eliminate any resistance because the Jews fear first and foremost those Palestinian brothers waging jihad against them. Look, we all understand that the brothers in Palestine, many of them do not have deep knowledge of the Qur'an and the Sunnah and so forth. But we have to recognize the circumstances which they live. They are no scholars amongst them. They live in occupation. Many of these young men have very limited means of education. They have been living in, camps, refugee camps and so forth, okay? So one cannot expect that these brothers would be all scholars of Islam waging jihad. But the point is that they are motivated by a faith in Islam, irrespective if they might err in some of their judgments and some of their ideas. And so therefore this is what brings fear to the Jews and the Christians. That this thing. And that's why one time the late president of France, François Mitterrand, when the Palestinian Intifada first occurred in 1984, thereabouts, he said that this presents a threat to the Christians in Europe, the European civilization. How could some boy throwing a rock as Jewish things present a threat to European civilization? Because it's the consequences that once people return to their religion, and then there will come a time when they start learning their religion, this is what they fear. Even though these people themselves might not be able to achieve all of this because of their deficiency in knowledge and their deficiency in religion and their deficiency maybe in material means. Likewise, once they have the general peace between the Arabs and the Jews, they will seek to strangle the Islamic da'wah and strike at the Islamic movement everywhere throughout the world. As Nixon mentioned, from Morocco to Indonesia. And this is exactly what's happened. Since the Gulf War, throughout the Islamic world, Islamic movements have faced unbelievable persecution. And scholars have been put in jail in countries which traditionally were thought of as supporting Islamic da'wah. And likewise, the execution of Muslims and so forth, the arrest, the stopping of da'wah projects throughout the Islamic world. Now when they strike at the Islamic movement, let me guarantee you, they do not care which group you're part of. They could care less if you're Salafi, Ikhwani, Tablighi, I mean whatever. When they strike all you young men with fears. That's all they take to the jail. That's all they will remove. They could care less what is your party affiliation. This is not to say, as I mentioned earlier, that one should not know the difference and should not follow the truth concerning when these groups, they err in a matter, you know. But the point is that we should understand what is their understanding of the issue. To them, it is Islam and against the West, or Islam against civilizations, they like to do it. And they have no type, this distinction means nothing to them. Likewise, they strike to remove all Arab military might, which they did in Iraq, and they'll do elsewhere. They want to subjugate the region to Jewish military terror, and American hegemony over the region can be seen. Throughout the Middle East now, you find American stations, American troops, American Air Force, American naval, and so forth. Throughout the Middle East, it has become like a big military camp for the American army. The American armies have left Europe just to encamp now in the lands of the Muslim. Likewise, they seek to alter the media programs and education curricula in the Islamic world. Anything which leads towards enmity towards the Jews. Just like they said during the peace process, the first peace conference, Shamir said, we would like you to see in your countries an end to the poisonous preachings against Israel. And after this recent bombings that they had in Palestine, the Israeli government and the American government demanded from Yasser Arafat to make the people in the masajid, the imams on Salat al-Jum'ah, say that you will not go to paradise if you die in jihad. So that people would not have a motivation to do this. They'll think they're just wasting their life. And likewise, you find in the masajid, you know, it's very strange now, in the last 4 or 5 years, Islam has been changed. And I gave a topic last summer, maybe some of you remember, the Abrahamic faiths, where I explained how they are changing even the nature of our religion. The idea of tawheed and wala and bara and so forth. And also, for instance, the idea of women in Islam, to Islamic feminism, which they're calling now, which I'll discuss later this week. A complete rewriting of Islam to modernism and so forth. These are not just events which occur haphazardly or without connection, but these are all part of a global plan to destroy Islam. Likewise, they seek to reinforce or enforce Jewish financial and economic control over the Middle East. Now, Muslim economies are nothing compared to Jewish economies. And with the peace, the Jews will be able to put their hands on the wealth of the Muslims and waste and destroy the wealth and the money for the future generations. They seek to conquer the region with Jewish and Christian teachings, and we see this now with the spread of missionary work in the Islamic world. Since the Gulf War and the New World Order, Islamic missionary work activity to the Muslim lands have increased exponentially. And they have just come with a new plan called the 1040 window, where they have targeted 100 cities, predominantly Muslim cities, as mentioned in this book, 100 Gateways of the 1040 window, and which we'll discuss myself and Brother Idris in a lecture in about a week and a half before we depart. How this is part and parcel of their plan to attack the Islamic world. They seek to morally corrupt the Muslims. You know, Muslims, we have basically one resource left in our hands: the youth of Islam. And they seek to morally corrupt the youth of Islam. Muslim youth who are raised upon rock and roll music, raised upon the lifestyle of McDonald's and Madonna, are not the youth which are going to stand up to Christians and Jews. But they can be used by them to fight to other Muslims. And women, this is the other resource that we have. Corrupt our women. Because when a man goes out and works, the wife is the one there with the child, and she provides the child's first sense of identity. And if the mother is, you know, concerned with soap operas, they have soap operas here? So, soap operas and so forth, and is concerned with the latest fashion, and the latest perfume, and the latest trend of cutting one's hair, what type of mother is this going to be? And so therefore they seek to corrupt us morally and culturally. And now with the, you know, with the spread of technology, of communications, you can see how they can corrupt you. I mean, after satellite dishes, right? You can pick up in Mecca any program which is broadcast in Europe. You can pick up through the internet any sorts of information can be transmitted. Wherever you are, you can be sitting in your house in Mecca or in Medina or in Cairo
and with the internet, you can sit and you can receive all that garbage into your home. And so therefore it opens to morally corrupt the people. Likewise, they want to give a chance for Jewish intelligence to reach parts that they never seemed to have access to before. It allows them to study the Islamic revival. It's very important for the Jews and the Christians, the Americans and the Europeans to know who are the people giving da'wah. What are they saying? What are the organizations? I guarantee you that all British organizations, all your Muslim clubs and so forth, have big files among British intelligence in this country. And all your leaders of your MSAs and so forth are probably having, files for them. This is part, they have to know this, even though you brothers might not do anything, but it's important for them to know, in case you grow and to become a figure. One day, there might be one of you young men who might become a very prominent figure. And it's important for them to know who you are, the brother right there, inshallah, who they are before that happens. So what is required of us in this case? Well, some scholars have said that it's required for us, of course, we have to overhaul the whole ummah. The revival, the repair work we have to do is a complete reform of this ummah. The first thing we need to do is we need to spread aqeedah between the ranks of the ummah, the aqeedah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the Salafi aqeedah. We need to spread this because this is what defines us, Tawheed. We need to know what is our religion, what is our beliefs, and in particular, the aqeedah of al-wala wal-bara. So Muslims know that their allegiance and their love and their affinity is to the fellow Muslims. And their disavowal is to the unbelievers. Many brothers might recognize that as a principle on their tongues. But when it comes to practical application, they are more harsh and severe with their fellow Muslims, even those Muslims who might share the same aqeedah with them, say manhaj with them, but might differ with them in a matter or might make a mistake than they are with the Jews and the Christians. Is this the religion of Islam? And so therefore, the first thing they try to do is they try to seek, we need to do is to spread the aqeedah of wala and bara. This is why they strike at this aqeedah through these ideas of the Abrahamic faith, through this idea of humanism, through the idea of secularism, and so forth and so on. The other thing is we must revive the role of our mosques to fight this media and educational blitz that we face. It's very sad that we have to have this lecture in a hall, in a rented hall. But this is because masajid wouldn't want to adopt this lecture, unfortunately, so the brothers were forced to rent a hall for it. This is a crime, that our masajid are not being used to educate and the people. The masjid is the place of the Muslim. And it is the masjid from where we learn our religion, from the message which we discuss our affairs, whether it's the affairs of our community, the affairs of our city, or the affairs of our ummah. And this division that we have, we make the masajid into empty bodies. If you come in, you just say as-salah and leave, and nothing occurs in this. This is not what Islam is about. The first thing the Prophet ﷺ did was he established the masjid. And it was in the masjid that he used to make decisions. He used to be a judge in the masjid, when he would make his decision for the hudud, for instance. And it was from the masjid he would send out his armies. And when he used to confine with his companions, he did it in the masjid. And the first school was in the masjid. And so therefore we must revive the masjid. We own the masajid. The Jum'ah khutbah is extremely important. We wait sometimes for these events in order to gather the brothers, but you have every single Friday an opportunity to address the Muslims. And this is a time for education, for enlightening the Muslims. And this is not done just in one area, but it's done throughout the Islamic world, in every single city and town and village. And so therefore the third thing we must do is that we must unify the ranks of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Those people who say they follow Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they follow the way of the Salaf al-Salih, must be unified. They cannot remain in hundreds and hundreds and tens of different parties and so forth. That is not acceptable. And this is the first step to uniting the whole ummah upon the way of the Salaf. Because as the people of the Salaf, who attribute themselves to the Salaf, and the people who attribute themselves to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah are ununified and are in disunity initially amongst themselves, how can we expect the whole ummah to unify? Once they unify, then the other parts of the ummah will come and unify upon the way of the Salaf. And for this reason, it's important that we come together on practical da'wah plans. When we want to unify the ummah, we don't unify the ummah by just saying, okay, unity, unity, unity. That doesn't do much. But by having practical da'wah plans, practical da'wah work.
The fourth matter is that we must establish Islamic financial institutions, so we have economic independence from the kuffar. It's very sad that a large number of the brothers, and I say this, with all my love and respect to my brothers, a large number of the brothers here in London receive some sort of financial aid from the unbelievers. I know that this is a socialist country, and the economic system of this country sort of encourages this type of lifestyle. This couldn't exist in America because it doesn't just exist in America. They don't have council homes, for instance, and so forth. But in England, it does because it's basically based upon a socialist economy. However, this type of lifestyle is detrimental. Muslim men must be able to find work and employment where they can get their self-dignity and support themselves and their families and then support their religion. And so therefore we must establish Muslim businesses, Muslim economic institutions in order to do that. And of course when we're talking on the scale of an ummah, Muslims need these type of economic institutions. They're Muslims in ummah. And many of you brothers might have unique opportunities due to the positions that you have now, being raised and educated in the West, to go back to your initial countries that you came from and establish big Islamic institutions, economic institutions, where you can empower Muslims in their villages and so forth. And so therefore a Muslim youth should, look beyond and put a high standard for himself and not always, look at a low level. Also we must be incumbent of the changes being made to our religion, changes in ideas. Who are introducing these ideas? What is the agenda between these new ideas? Whether it's feminism, whether it's the Abrahamic faith, whether it's modernistic interpretation of the Qur'an and Sunnah, whatever it might be. We must also link current events to the Qur'an and the Sunnah and the Aqeedah of Wala and Bara. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He sent the Qur'an down to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, it was revealed concerning specific instances. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed certain verses concerning the Jews and the Christians, concerning Wala and Bara, the companions knew what it was talking about because these occurred due to certain incidents which occurred, Allah revealed verses. And so therefore, when we are not able to take those verses in the Qur'an or the Hadith and link it to the reality which we live in, the current circumstances, then we fail to understand the Qur'an. We must be able to link the Qur'an to our lives. The Qur'an must be a living entity in us. Likewise, we must spread hope of Allah's true promise. The Ummah should not be one of despair. Many times Muslims despair. They say, oh, what's happening? Bosnia, Palestine, Kashmir, Iraq, Philippines, so on and so on. They become despair. And so therefore, as a result of despair, they just blow up and they like to do stuff like a demonstration for one day. So it's like, like when you shake up a Pepsi bottle, right? And it has all that pressure, release it, it foams out, but then it comes back down again. That's not what we need in this ummah. We don't need a valve to release the pressure when it reaches a certain thing. And this is in fact one of the ideas of the kuffar. That when the pressure gets high, they allow the Muslims to release that tension in order so they can go back to fall asleep again. But what we need to work with wisdom, with knowledge, to revive this ummah. It's also incumbent upon us to spread Islam in the West, and in particular in America. The point is that the way of the people of the Sunnah, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, is that we fight one qadr with another qadr. This is from our Aqeedah. When Allah decrees for you illness, you fight it with another qadr, which is medicine. And you say in your dua and qunut, oh Allah, I seek refuge from your anger through your mercy. And I seek refuge from you with you. This is from the Aqeedah of Qadr. And so likewise, we fight them by putting them as Muslims. And this is a way, because if these people, if you imagine now, if Britain was 50% Muslim, would they be able to have stopped the Muslims in supporting the brethren in Bosnia, like they did in the last council? Of course not. But Muslims doesn't mean just Sufi Muslims, the Muslims in the tongue who don't understand anything. Muslims mean Muslims according to the Qur'an and the Sunnah, Muslim men and women who have the correct beliefs and also have the correct conduct and behavior and morals. Likewise, we must stand fully with our brothers in Palestine. We must not let this issue of Palestine die. It's incumbent that at least once in a while we give a khutbah in our universities
We give a talk to remind the Muslims that this issue, even if the people make peace, will not end until the day of judgment when we face the Christians and Jews on the battlefield. This issue must remain alive in our hearts if the issue is put asleep by world powers. We must never allow this issue to die. Likewise, to support there are many charitable organizations in Palestine. We need to support them with our money. We need to have collections for these brothers and support them, and especially those organizations which are following the way of Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah, are very close to the truth. We must support them in Palestine. Through da'wah, through money, anything you can do. This must be done. Likewise, for the Muslim countries, Muslims, they must, and very wealthy Muslims, they must withdraw their wealth and deposit from the banks of the Europeans and the Americans. The kuffar live on our money. The Muslim countries like in the Gulf and Saudi Arabia deposit billions of dollars in these banks. And it's with these billions of dollars that they fight us with. And it is at the same time you find millions of Muslims dying from hunger, displacement, war. Take this money. Of course, we don't have the ability to do that because we're not in charge of these countries, but the Ummah, it's its responsibility to stop depositing the money in the banks of the kuffar and to spend the money of the Ummah upon the needs of this Ummah. And at the same time, it's a requirement of the Ummah to save the money for the future generations. Because if we keep it this way, the Jews and Christians will gobble up all our money under the name of the peace process. Our last thing is that the Muslims must, fight a certain mental attitude, that of luxury, waste, and void. Muslims are very luxurious in their lifestyles. We always want the finer things of life. And we're also very wasteful. And also we have a void in our lives. Even those brothers who identify themselves with Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, with the Salafi way, have a void in their lives. They really don't know what they're doing. They're just sort of moving along day by day, and the days and the months and the years go on, and they have no purpose. Just sort of moving along. We must stop this. We are now, we must save our energies and not waste our time. And every single cent must be not put except to the right use. Because we face an enemy of such large proportions. And this battle is not a battle which we face now, which is like a battle for a piece of land, that if we lose that land. No, this is a battle for existence or extermination. And therefore, the battle will result in a victor and a vanquished. And so therefore we must use all our resources and energies for this ummah. Every single Muslim youth must think of himself as a soldier in an army. It doesn't mean that you have a gun in your hand and you're going to do something crazy, but it means that you have a purpose in your life. And you have a role to fulfill in your ummah. And you see yourself fulfilling that role. Not that you're just sort of carrying on day by day, month by month, year by year, engaging in a lot of useless discussion concerning a lot of matters which really, will bring you no benefit, neither in your religion nor in your hereafter. And think that this is, the da'wah salafiyah. This is not da'wah salafiyah. This is not the way of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. This is not the meaning of being a Muslim man. Okay? It's brothers need to realize that they have left the age of being kids. Right? Most of you brothers now are passing from that age. And for those who will listen to this by way of tape or by cassette, you brothers have left the age of being kids where you are carefree and so forth. That's this type of period we all go through. Where you're 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, whatever. You're sort of like no attachments, no responsibilities, you're in school, whatever, you're sort of carefree. But, this has to come to an end. And you must become adults and you must become men and women and face the responsibilities that you have to yourself, to your families, to your communities, and to your ummah. And in the end we should know, without doubt, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prevails in His purpose, even though most people do not know. And that victory will come to this ummah, whether the disbelievers like that or not. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He is the one who sent His Prophet with guidance in the true religion, to manifest it, to uplift it over all ways of life, even if the disbelievers find that adverse. And with that I conclude my lecture. I apologize for the haste we went through. There was a lot of material we covered.
and I hope at least you've got a general idea of what I'd want to discuss. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. And so that was the drinks.
Jazakallah khair for this very informative and instructive lecture. We now have approximately, in reality, approximately about 7 minutes, but inshallah for really the benefit of all of you, I'm going to, if it's okay with all of you, to possibly extend that a bit. Because I know a lot of brothers and sisters, of course, have a lot of questions. We already have a few of you that were written during the first session. So, if it's okay with all of you, inshallah, that we extend the question and answer period a bit for possibly another 15. Maghrib is what? Does anybody know what time Maghrib is? 6:20? Okay.
So I thought like that.
If we do it at least until the time of Adhan, is that okay? It's now 6:06. 6:07.
14 minutes.
Another, yeah, right. Probably 15 minutes. Is that all right? Right. So if anybody has...
With regards to the remarks you're making about Palestine and our brothers, especially for Hamas. I mean, in the light of recent events, the bomb and everything, you find a lot of Muslims, as you mentioned, they're emotional, and they tend to praise the action of killing innocent people. This, I'm looking at you mentioned this action, this specific action, driving yourself with TNT, etc., this is a sunnah.
Yeah. So brother's asking a question, a logical question is taking yourself, driving yourself with the bomb and exploding bombs, is this for action for the sunnah? I do not have knowledge that this is permissible according to Sharia, okay? And the reason why is because the issue is predicated upon the difference between is this issue to be thought of as a type of suicide, or is it concerned, is it a type of, in battle, a Muslim is permitted in jihad to attack the disbelievers, even though it might seem that by attacking the disbelievers it would result in most likelihood, you see what I'm saying, his death. So this is something that the scholars of the Ummah need to give a fatwa with. I'm not aware of any fatwa concerning this subject, either affirming it or negating this. And if any of the brothers have heard something, I would like to hear them share that, so I would know myself. So I can't say, Allah knows best whether this is permissible according to Sharia or not. But the point is that what I want to make, the thing which we have to understand is that the situation with Hamas and so forth, yes, I mean obviously the brothers in Hamas have lots of ideas or beliefs which we might find disagreeable to us, okay? Some of them have positions which are somewhat soft with the Shia in Iran. They look up towards them and so forth. Although it might be political in one sense, it seems to have filtered down also in another sense. They're not Shia, but they are, in other words, they don't see it as a big issue, you see what I'm saying, the issue of Sunni and Shia. Likewise, their knowledge of religion is weak in many respects and many aspects. But the point is one has to understand is that is there an alternative now for the Muslims there? No. The da'wah of the Salaf is very weak in Palestine, almost non-existent, okay? And so therefore, one does not want to take a stance against them, okay, to such a degree that it is an issue that you are giving victory, or by implication assisting the Jews and the Christians, okay? At the same time, one should not support anything which is wrong. And for those brothers who have knowledge and who have positions of respect in the Ummah, those like the Sheikhs and so forth, it's a responsibility to give these brothers nasiha as to what is best. Okay, one of these written questions, it says, Assalamu alaikum, alaikum assalam. If communism was devised by the Jews, how was this perceived as a threat to the world order which the Christians and Jews are trying to form? And was the Cold War fought to intimidate the Muslims rather than the followers of communism? And finally, what role do Freemasons play in this? Well, that's why the first two questions, when we're going through talking about events in the world, we shouldn't get bogged down into the details, okay? The specific details of what occurs is really not important to us, because what we should be concerned with only is just the general trends that we may understand which affect us. But as the specific details of, as to how they perceive something, or as some of the questions mentioned, because it enters in sometimes a lot of hypothetical discussion, which really is of no benefit. What is the role of the Freemasons, though? The Freemasons have a very important role. Many of the political leaders in the world are Freemasons, and Freemasonry, as has been written by the scholars of Islam, is, basically a front to support your Zionist aims. And the scholars of the Ummah, in a fatwa by the Muslim World League, delivered maybe in the 70s, declared that any Muslim who becomes a Freemason, knowing what Freemasonry is about, is an apostate and has left Islam. So the Masons have a very important role in this. Yes?
You mentioned about preparation. One of the points I was interested in is that business. You mentioned some halal business that Muslims can business.
So, halal business is whatever is available in your country. I'm not from this country. I don't know how specifically you would go about setting up a business or something. But whatever, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has permitted you to set up. A clothing store, a food store, a factory, you set up a consulting firm for those brothers who know computer programming, and you hire new students who've graduated, and you support that thing. And whatever skills you have for that. The Muslims need to be dynamic and to use their situation in a way to set up businesses. What Muslims sometimes think is that the only business that they can get engaged in is selling Islamic books. No, who said that? We need booksellers, and we also need clothes makers, right? And we also need food producers, and we need farmers, and we need doctors, and we need scientists, and we need, also you need computer programmers and engineers and so forth. Or why can't 5 or 6 Muslim engineers in the United Kingdom set up a construction business to build homes and so forth? And even they sell these homes to the disbelievers. And then the laborers, right, who work, the physical laborers, they hire Muslims to do. What's the harm in that? Or does every single Muslim have to become a book salesman and sell only Islamic books? This is the only type of business we are allowed to do in our religion? Sell books and tapes? Of course not. So the point is that, whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides means of trade, these are all halal, and there's a specific prohibition in the religion regarding that. Yes. Okay, quick question. Good question. Okay, a Sahih hadith says that the Prophet ﷺ said, there are 3 things which, if they appear, no good will be to a soul who has not believed before them and has done good: the rising of the sun from the west, the appearance of Dajjal, and the appearance of the beast from the earth, Ahmed. However, another Sahih hadith says that Isa will come after the sun has risen from the west and after the Dajjal appears. So who are the people in the hadith say we'll have to accept Islam or else? Does it mean that those who perhaps realized Islam was the truth but hadn't taken the Shahada? Or does it mean kuffar who will say, be like munafiqs and will be rejected by Allah? Now, there's some confusion here between some Qadiani ideas and the sequence of the events of the hour of the Day of Judgment. The hadith, I don't know if the hadith saying that 3 matters, being the rising of the sun from the west, and the appearance of Dajjal, and the appearance of the beast from the earth, from Ahmed. But if that hadith is authentic, what I do know is the hadith mentions that the rising of the sun from the west. And Isa comes before the rising of the sun from the west. Rising of the sun from the west is one of the final signs that occur just before the Day of Judgment. And at that time everybody on the earth will believe, but their faith will not help them had they not believed or done good before that. So there seems to be some confusion. As far as the people, be the people of the earth for Isa. When Isa comes, he will give the people the choice of Islam or the sword. The people of the earth, it doesn't mean the hypocrites or those people who recognize Islam to be the truth but didn't take the Shahada or for one reason. It doesn't mean that. Yes? Right. Yes. No. The hadith refers to that, he's mentioning that the hadith says that the Jews, that a hudna, a cessation of hostilities will occur for the first time between you and the Christians. Okay, Banu al-Asl, the hadith says, which is a term used for the Christians, European Christians. They will come to you to fight an army of disbelievers other than them. So, before the Day of Judgment, when these signs appear, what will happen is that the Christians will be facing an enemy of unbelievers, even though they themselves are unbelievers, and they will be unable to deal with this enemy. So for the first time in history, they will come and they will make a true cessation of hostilities. The implication is that the Christians always fight us. We're always in war with the Christians until this time, which is true. Always somewhere in the Islamic world, throughout history, Muslims are fighting the Christians somewhere in the world. And when this occurs, there will be a cessation of hostilities, and we'll fight this common enemy. When we will prevail, the battle will occur, and when the Muslims prevail, a Christian will raise the cross and say, the cross gave us victory. A Muslim will say, you lied,